I'm of a mind to be opposed to the introduction of misogyny, hate crime, but I won't share my broader thoughts with you at this late hour. You'll be delighted to know. But I do think that there are problems that we need to be clear about before we can even have this conversation. Because what is our definition of misogyny here? We just assume, we talk about it as hatred of women. But I think it is not straightforward to legislate against hatred of women in 2021 when there's such a toxic debate about what our definition of a woman is. What is a woman? Who is and who isn't a woman? And we heard the very lively discussion earlier that we don't agree in this place necessarily. We know that somebody can simply declare themselves as a woman regardless of biological reality. We know that the debate about whether only women have cervixes has scuppered leading politicians who seem unsure about biology in that regard. And I don't say this to be glib or to, as in case the noble Baroness Chakrabarti thinks I'm trying to stir up trouble again, is because it's a genuine issue, it seems to me, that the conflation of sex and gender, and I know that the amendment doesn't do that, it separates it out, but I'm saying misogyny as hatred of women is not straightforward at the moment. I also want to know kind of which or what misogyny this is trying to address, because if you conflate, if you erase, for example, sex-based rights, which some feminists think that is going on at the moment, then is that a misogynistic outlook? Certainly some feminists argue it is. There's certainly a huge amount of visceral and vile hatred thrown at gender-critical women, meted out by some of the gender and trans extremists, not by trans people in general, I hasten to add. Those kind of people who drove Kathleen Stock, Professor Kathleen Stock, out of her job at Sussex University. They sounded misogynistic to me, but are they the target of this amendment? And so I'm just drawing attention to the fact that saying that you want a misogynistic hate crime, it doesn't clarify to me what it's trying to do. And I understand that what I've said is contentious, and not everybody here will agree with some of the points that I've made even so far. But therefore, in this context, is it appropriate to get the law, let alone the police on the ground, to try and untangle what is a very toxic discussion in society and to try and implement it? I don't know how that's going to help women by putting that on to the police. The other thing that I just wanted... Yes, of course.
Could she just perhaps accept that if she was to speak, I don't think we should both be standing.
Oh, sorry, I don't.
If she was to speak to some of the senior police officers, men and women, who have to deal with the victims of hostility and aggravated crimes, largely motivated by misogyny, and if you ask them what they think misogyny is, I think you would get a very, very clear response, because they, day to day, interact with people who are directly victims of it. So while I think it's very interesting to have a sort of moral maze-like discussion at a theoretical level, I do think that, just to be clear, what those of us who are proposing this amendment, including the noble and learned Lord Judge, want, is to do something now about the victims who are experiencing hostility based on misogyny. And I don't think we should be just talking in airy circles about this. We need to do something.
I will try and avoid airy circles, but actually only not long ago I was invited to speak to a gathering of police officers of various ranks on the issue of hate crimes, and I can safely say that it was a 50-50 split. So I don't think that you... And by the way, quite a number of the female officers there were supportive of me and my position, just as an aside. So it's not an airy-fairy moral maze position as it goes, although it does try and have some principle. I actually am about to go on and talk about, however, policing. because I understand that one of the reasons why there's a sense of urgency about making misogyny a hate crime is in response to the horrendous and high-profile treatment, murders, rapes of women, and of course we're all mentioning Sarah Everard, but there's many more. But I wonder whether, in fact, framing that violence against women through hate will actually solve the problem that it says it's going to tackle. Because as far as I can see, we have laws against indecent exposure, stalking, voyeurism, sexual assault, domestic abuse, rape. They are criminal offences, largely serious criminal offences, and I don't understand why an additional law would act as a further deterrent or reassure women. I just don't get that. Because if, as some argue, and I agree with them, that women are having problem gaining justice in the courts at present for those very acts, why would hate crime as an aggravated offence make any difference if the crimes in question are not being policed, investigated or prosecuted satisfactorily in the first place? And when I read the literature on misogyny, on hate crimes, and this was stated, mentioned by the Nobel Baroness Newlove, you know, the theory goes that minor incidents of gross sexist behaviour are misogynistic, that they will indisputably be part of a continuum that will lead to more serious crimes. But I worry that there's a danger there of relativising the horrors of rape and murder, but also tangling up the police in not as serious events and take their eye off the ball of what I think they need to be doing, which is to, of course, be policing the streets, protecting people, prosecuting and so on. So what I'm saying is I'm worried that this will be causing a distraction for the police from doing the very job that I think that they need to be doing. Just, you know, to use one example, because I've been involved in talking to people in the area of Rochdale and Rotherham about the organised networks of male grooming and the systematic abuse and rape of vulnerable young women in those areas, that was ignored largely by the authorities, downplayed and continues to be not discussed. That seems to me to be what we should be discussing here. Labelling it as misogynistic doesn't seem to me to help. I just want them to do the job of investigating when women are abused. That seems to me to be far more important.
My Lords, I rise